Good afternoon, everybody. Hey, Keith, thanks for the introduction, and it's great to be here again, sponsoring the luncheon. The Westchester Chamber has been instrumental, actually, in the growth of my practice. Joe and Yasmin have been a great team in coaching me along some of these business topics and trying to get my practice seen. So I greatly appreciate that. I feel like the host of Saturday Night Live that comes back again, to do the monologue. But I'm appreciative to be here. Today, we're going to talk about youth mental health, and we're going to talk about, just very briefly, just as a theme, the Breakfast Club. How many folks remember the Breakfast Club from back in the day? Good, a great number of people. Just forget what you saw in the Breakfast Club, all right? Because mental health is actually different now than it was in 1985. So I'm going to draw some contrast to that. All right. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know how they got up there again. Yasmin, did you do that? No? You slipped that in there? No? Okay. So just to be mindful, guys, Friday morning, just check on your people. You know what I'm saying? Call around, well checks, whatever you have to do, just check on your people on Friday morning.
That hurts, sir. That hurts.
Yeah. So with the Breakfast Club, that movie was like a coming of age movie to some degree. I can remember seeing that when it came out. I was actually 12 years old. Some of you guys may have been a little bit older in seeing that, but it brought to the forefront, as a start, some of the challenges that our teens have with their mental health. Yes, there was a great deal of comedy that was wrapped up in the movie, but it brought out these archetypes of people who struggle, even in high school, with a layer of burden as if they were adults in the things that they were challenged with. And I would like to say that, back in 1985, when we thought about youth mental health, yes, it was on our radar, and yes, we were providing treatment. But even the way that we diagnosed conditions back then, so very different than what we do today. Even in how we provide the treatment is different. Even the way that we collected data is different. And as I was doing the research for this presentation, there are huge gaps in the data, even in looking at youth and mental health. But we're going to talk about that a little bit and make some comparisons to what we see now. One of the things that I will share is that I believe that we're living in a much more complicated society when we think about mental health compared to over 30 years ago. There's always the challenge of trying to manage this issue of trauma, but societal stressors are much different now than they were back in 1985. Imagine being back in 1985 and having to deal with someone who's able to describe everything that's going on with you and put it out to the whole high school, scratch that, put it out to the whole city, no, scratch that, put it out to the whole world, everything that's going on with you. So we're talking about things at a totally different level. Social determinants of health are always challenges when we think about places where we live, work, and play, and all of the things that create barriers for us getting the appropriate help that we need. Western behaviors are actually, counterproductive when we think about overall and general health. And then there's the issue of genetics, which we know a lot more about now than we did before. And all of these things create this very complex matrix when we look at youth mental health. So what I can say is that we've had signals of increased mental distress. We've had increased mental health diagnoses. Part of that's because of awareness, and part of that's because we've become more accurate in how we diagnose. But there's a signal that there's increasing distress among our kids, and we've also had increased rates of suicide. It's amazing to think that if you were to put all the kids at Lakota East or Lakota West, 40% of these kids are having persistent, not episodic or sometimes, but persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness. 40% of our kids who are in grade school or high school. And this isn't just a psychological thing. It's not just a spiritual thing, but this is a true example of what happens when the environment matches up to what happens in the brain. The brain, with all of its neurons and all of its circuits, create our functioning, but it also creates challenges for our conditions, which include depression, anxiety, chronic disease, substance use, and psychotic illness. Society now paired up with the brain. And over the past 10 years or so, we've had a 35% increase in depression and psychotic illness and anxiety disorders. So there's a reason for this change, and we're going to dive into that a little bit today. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how it impacts you as business owners. Let's talk about the big one, and that's this. This is the thing that nobody wants to talk about. Matter of fact, you've probably been better served if I even bring it up today. But we have a lot of people, a lot of youth who are increasingly dying by suicide. And if we look at the numbers, of over 40,000 people across the country who die by suicide, that is an astounding number. What I have here is actually the 49,900, people who died by suicide last year, and then the 42,000 people who died by breast cancer last year. And I really believe that this is a great contrast, and I'll tell you why. 30 years ago, no one was talking about having breast cancer. No one was upfront coming before a group of people saying that they were a survivor of breast cancer. Breast cancer was something that was whispered about. You told someone in their ear, you didn't share it with the community that you suffered from this cancer. But as we brought this out to the limelight, we brought out to the public, we provided education, now we have more people who are able to be screened. We have more money that goes into funding for research. Our way of being able to detect breast cancer is astronomically much better than it was 30 years ago because we brought breast cancer from the shadows and we brought it to the limelight, much like we should do with suicide. Back in 1985, when the Breakfast Club came out, there were 26,000 people who died from suicide documented, compared to what we're seeing now with nearly 50,000 people who are dying by suicide. So we have to find a way to make sure that this is not a whispered condition. So we have certain groups that are suffering disproportionately more. Black youth aged 10 to 19 have had a 60% increase in their suicide rates. Those that are in the LGBTQ community have had a substantial increase in suicidality. So that we have to find a way to bring this to be, common conversation, even among the youth when we talk about safety and wellness. I'm going to transition a little bit to talk about youth cannabis use, because that has also been a challenge when we think about mental health. So when we think about youth cannabis use in 2024, we had over a quarter of 12th graders who have used cannabis, 15% of 10th graders, and 7% of 8th graders who've used cannabis. And that sounds quite alarming to me, that we have this number of people using cannabis, and I'm going to talk in a minute why that is a problem for our youth. But actually, 25% in 2024, 38% in 1985, and then 51% in 1979. So for those people here, did you guys go to class? Did they have teachers and guidance counselors back then? I'm just trying to figure that out. So we look at these numbers and we say, well, these numbers are not as high as what they used to be. We think about the use of cannabis, but this is the problem. The cannabis back in the 1980s only had 2% concentration of THC compared to what's being presented now, where we can get over 90% concentration of THC. So we may have fewer people using than back in the day when you guys were in high school, but what they're accessing is far more potent, and there lies the danger. Not only more potent, but look at this. This looks like something that you would buy off the shelf at Walgreens, right? When you're trying to get your gummies and candies. You know, what we have in regards to THC products, now they're being presented in such a way that it does attract youth use. So this is also a problem, and I'm glad that Governor DeWine actually passed some legislation last week to try to oppose this. So you guys may be asking, what's the big deal, right? Because I'm sure we have some adults in here who may be on medical marijuana or people who may intermittently use. So what's the big deal about the kids kind of trying this out, right? They're going to try stuff out anyway. They need to make decisions and be adults. So let's talk about that. So between the ages of 12 and 25, our brain undergoes this renovation or this remodeling. It starts to prune away parts of the brain which are not important. While it's doing that, unfortunately, as you all have seen, because I have still 2 teenagers at home, you know, the smart part of the brain, the thinking part of the brain actually starts to draw back. And the part of the brain that seeks pleasure and the part of the brain that's highly emotional, that starts to grow. So we have teenagers who are highly emotional, highly impulsive, who really aren't thinking, and just where we are in development. It just so happens that some of the material that's in cannabis actually has a receptor target within the brain, and that receptor plays a part in this natural maturation process of the brain. When we're able to now consume high-potency THC products, we overstimulate that receptor so that now this maturation process of the brain starts to go haywire. So now people have weaker impulse control, impaired memory and learning. We start to lose IQ points, and even at that point, stopping to use marijuana or cannabis, you don't get those IQ points back. There's altered threat response and increased anxiety. People have difficult time being motivated. We can't really coordinate what's happening between our thinking and our emotions, and we have increased risk of psychotic illness, to the point that many of these kids, once they become psychotic, it's very difficult for us to bring them back. So why should the chamber care? For one, I care because I have 5 kids, as I mentioned, and trying to make sure that I can keep them healthy and well, much like you want to keep your children healthy and well. But what we're seeing with the youth today becomes your workforce tomorrow. So we're seeing, challenges with people who are less ready for employment. Talent pools that have gotten a bit smaller, they're entering the workforce. People skills or soft skills, it seems as if there are a lot more younger adults who don't have those capabilities. So we end up spending more time and more money training and onboarding the younger generation of the workforce. So it's become a big ball of rubber bands. It becomes a big mess. And Albert Einstein once says that we can't solve our problems with the same thinking that we use to create them. So I'm just going to go through a handful of things that we can do with our youth in order to better protect their mental health. So we have to do things differently. We have to church differently. We have to advocate differently, and we're going to have to talk differently. So let's talk about doing differently. At the first sign of distress, we should be having conversations. As soon as there is a change in sleeping, eating, socialization, change in grades, any of those signs, we should be having a conversation with our kids and quickly getting them to primary care. I would love for all of you to send your kids to me for treatment. We do adults and kids. But your first step, an easy step, is getting them to primary care, getting them to their family physician or pediatrician. What's different about 1985 is that we have a lot more treatments that are evidence-based to be able to help kids. So we do groups and counseling, and we've always had that, but now our groups and counseling is highly structured to the point that we can create anatomical and functional changes in the brain just with doing counseling and groups. We're able to do genetic testing, which helps us understand which medications will be the best fit for individuals. Our medications have become far better tolerated and more effective in treating a spectrum of conditions. And then we have more procedures that we can do in psychiatry that do not involve medication, that actually have a great impact on the brain. I'm trying to convince some of these anesthesiologists and sports medicine folks to become psychiatrists. We have to do it differently. So there is a suicide, crisis line that we have here in Butler County. You guys can take a picture of this. And this team is actually a social worker who comes out. A deputy may come out, but the deputy's trained in mental health to be able to help with the crisis. So this is an important number to remember. And then the 988 number is always available to be able to provide support for anyone who is in crisis. Let's talk about doing different. More time outside, right? How much time do you guys get outside typically? I bet probably 40 minutes, right? This is probably the most outside that you're going to get all day coming here today, right? We've changed as a species in regards to how much time we allow for our exposure to the sun. But our exposure to the sun is necessary for us to have appropriate brain functioning. So increased time outside, less time on the phone, right? How many folks check their screen time on their phone? Anybody do that? Yeah, I'm embarrassed to look at how much time I spend on the phone, right? But the phones are designed to hold your attention and affect key areas in the brain. So when you think about phone time and social media, these are the effects that we get. So we affect the prefrontal cortex. We become more impulsive and have greater risk-taking that's directly correlated to screen time. We also have increasing difficulties with repetitive depressive thoughts. And then we get this greater sensitivity to social approval or rejection. All of those things change in proportion to our time on our phones and engaging with social media. For whatever reason, the United States is behind the times in limiting phones and also limiting social media. Other countries have already put in restrictions because they see the health risks associated with this in our kids. You need more time doing physical activity, right? So now it seems like going to gym class may be the most physical activity that most kids get. Nobody's actually going outside and playing with sticks and running up creeks and anything like that, right? So we have to figure out a way to encourage more physical activity. We have to encourage more face-to-face contact. Most of our communication now is through our phone and at best video through the phone. But when is the last time you've seen this? I've seen it twice in the past 6 to 9 months. You rarely see this in the neighborhood now, where kids are gathering together at someone's place face to face or out doing something together. Rarely this is seen. And then next, we got to eat better, right? So the food here was great. So I was looking at the choices, but I bet for most of us, this will probably be a better meal that we'll have for lunch than we have throughout the week, right? Lots of donuts, fast foods. So why is this important? These ultra-high processed foods actually change our gut bacteria. When these gut bacteria are changed, it sends inflammation signals to the brain, which then sends further inflammation to the rest of the body. So what we eat actually affects our mood, our concentration, our focus, and then the inflammatory signals that we send to the rest of the body. Then next, we have to advocate different. Don't want to wear red hats or blue hats, but there's truth in that Medicaid is the biggest provider of mental health and substance use disorder treatment, whether you're talking about for adults or for kids. SNAP benefits affect food security. When we don't have food security, then our mental health and our physical wellness is at risk. So we have to find ways to advocate for these things, because this is the backbone of our mental health and our substance use treatment for our country. Next, we have to do church different, right? So many people, before they come to see me or before they go to their primary care doctor, they go to their pastor, right, or their priest, and they start their mental health journey there. So we have to find a way to educate and empower churches to be able to receive these people. Let them understand what mental health is, how we can refer, how can we get training to be able to even affect suicide. The churches also play a part. Then lastly, we have to talk differently. So I put up that slide that in 1979, 50% of the folks were smoking weed at some point, right? And then when your kid comes in with these symptoms, you're going to act like you never did that before and it was never a thing, right? So these are some talking points I'd like for you to consider as you're talking to your kid about substances. One, hey, if you find yourself in a situation where someone is using, let's find an exit plan. How are you going to leave that situation? Share your experiences with substances or with mental health with your kids, so they'll be able to have a very open dialogue with you. Avoid labeling the kids, right? We don't like labels. We want to be addressed as individuals. We can talk about symptoms, but not labels. And encourage them to be in healthy activities. There's a slide before this. Again, being very open and honest, ongoing conversations. Be very clear and consistent with what you expect from them within the home, what's allowed and what's not allowed. And then being able to have an intelligent conversation about the risk regarding brain development, problems with memory, attention, mental health, addiction, all those things that circle substance use. Then lastly, this is our practice, Modern Psychiatry and Wellness. We're in Westchester. We're also in Hamilton. This is the phone number. We do a great deal when it comes to youth mental health and regarding to counseling, medication management if that's necessary. But we also treat substance use disorder. We provide diagnosis, provide therapy, and we have a youth intensive outpatient program, one of the few in the area, where we can help youth who suffer from substance use disorder. So guys, I appreciate your time. I'm hoping that you'll see that there's been some differences in what's going on with youth mental health, in addition to how youth mental health and substance use disorder directly affects us as we manage our families, but also with our businesses. Thank you.